I'm going to be here making a quick video on Richard Donner's The Omen from 1976. I grew to be quite an enormous fan of The Omen. Initially, I considered it fairly lackluster in comparison to The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, or even something like Alberto De Martino's The Antichrist, which is a phenomenal film. Or even Exorcist 2, which I'm quite a fan of. However, it grew to the point wherein... I've never considered Richard Donner a phenomenal filmmaker. I enjoyed the first Lethal Weapon, I think everyone does. And Superman, the first 45 minutes of Superman, which Noel Oakeshott and I once joked ought to be cut into a little 45-minute feature known as The Man of Tomorrow, which would be the best Superman film of all time. Other than that, I've never been overwhelmingly impressed by Richard Donner's work. I don't know many people who are. Well, I don't know many people in real life, period, but I haven't encountered many people on the internet who are, browsing forums and whatnot, which I don't do much of anymore, to be fair, because it's just not a pleasant experience. In any case, I find that the film, especially when one watches a Blu-ray copy of it, is very strikingly filmic. The star of the show isn't Richard Donner's direction, more so is Gilbert Taylor's photography. And I also found this is a film wherein I started speculating about its philosophy of editing. The credit is to one Stuart Baird. Stuart Baird is credited with editing some Ken Russell films prior to this one, which is quite fascinating. He edited a bunch of Richard Donner's films, as it turns out, Superman being one of them, Lethal Weapon, and Lady Hawk, Lethal Weapon 2. But, I find that the film's editing philosophy, it's very forceful. There's a certain degree to which the events are meant to be in your face, and even when we don't... I recall when we first introduced to Patrick Troughton, great scene in The Second Doctor, by the way, that's fun. When we first introduced to that character, the scene begins with Gregory Peck in the midst of conversation, in the midst of having just finished speaking a sentence to these two men in his office, and then he gets the buzzer, and it's like, oh, this priest wants to see you. The previous scene is Roger Vaughan in a different place entirely, to my recollection, or a different place entirely. I think there are moments like this in the film, almost as though it's trying to make its way through to the prominent plot points without spending too much time meandering. I don't know if this is a kind of Ken Russell kind of carnivalesque gothic explosion, or whether this is some gothic baroque explosion, or whether this is meant to be a film which had a lot of extended exposition and was cutting it down as much as possible. Who knows? It's a 2-hour film. Maybe they were the studio, hoping it to be a big hit, wanted to make sure it was right under 2 hours. I'm not certain. Stuart Baird would sadly later be responsible for directing Star Trek Nemesis, which is just a real shame as it was. Although probably not even as bad as some of the newer Star Trek programs they're putting out, to be perfectly blunt. I find that The Omen is more so a film of horrifying, spectacular moments rather than tension, mood, and atmosphere. There's certainly atmosphere, but it's guided along by these horrifying, visceral set pieces, which I can imagine in 1976 film critics having an enormous problem with. The film has a mixed reception. Had a mixed reception at the time. It's considered something of a horror classic at this time, although not as well considered as Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, for example. That is very understandable, at least in my opinion. Although the reason I say it's why I thought it was understandable that critics wouldn't have considered it well at the time, as opposed to the films like Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist. I don't think The Exorcist was that well received comparatively at the time either, compared to its reputation now. But the thing with The Omen is that film critics were not particularly fond of. The whole, the Bonnie and Clyde shtick was not working for a lot of film critics. Violence was considered a very improper subject for well, certainly films, but you could say art and media period for a time there, it was considered gratuitous and simply a way of getting an audience, entertained. There was no way of stylizing violence to a degree that was aesthetically satiating or interesting, or a kind of celebration of absurd indulgence or anything like that. It's tough, you see, because Sam Peckinpah, obviously with his infamous Wild Bunch shootout, which inspired the likes of a Michael Mann or a John Woo, Brian De Palma in Scarface, whatever you want. It's at the same time, Sam Peckinpah was very upset that that sequence was celebrated as exciting and filmic and entertaining, as opposed to really disturbing and horrifying and something that made you want to look away from it. I think he wanted something akin to what Spielberg directed in the start of Saving Private Ryan, which isn't really enjoyed as an action sequence. It's just kind of like looked at with this kind of horrific awe. Incidentally, that's the only one of two scenes in Saving Private Ryan I admire. Otherwise, that's a film which really tries to emphasize. And Spielberg, well, this time in Hollywood in particular, partly due to Spielberg, possibly, especially Frank Darabont garbage, where it's just, they're just elbowing you, poking you in the shoulder the entire film, telling you what you're supposed to feel, and it's over sentimental, this cliche, pandering to an audience. It's like, this is what you're meant to be feeling here. This movie is meant to be this. This is meant to be effective and emotionally evocative right now. And it's just like, can't it just speak for itself? Oh no, it can't. That's why you're doing that. Anyway, that's a silly tangent. The Omen is to be enjoyed viscerally as this intensive horror trip. I also do find the film to be genuinely scary in a way. Not many films I do, but I think the way in which it, the seriousness with which the narrative's taken, and the sense of absolute doom, and that like the real, oh yeah, like Satan is going to win vibe of the film, to the point wherein photographs are cosmically cursed with clues as to how those in the photograph who may be considered enemies of the devil will die. And it's like the cosmos itself is coming together to kill these people, as though Satan is more powerful as God or has these powers. I mean, it's quite horrific. I mean, he seems to have more power than Pazuzu did in The Exorcist, for example, that horrifying little, just the horrifying child, Damien. I mean, I think he really sets a standard for like unassuming, harmless looking child, and yet there's something so sadistic in it. It's like a fear. He invokes a fear we have of that fear you get when you see a child kind of torturing an insect or something. That's Damien in a way, right? But the film itself, every moment is really very pronounced. I think it's everyone in the production believed in the seriousness and the general effectiveness of the work. And I found it also fascinating that I think it's partly to do with the fact that it feels like such an original screenplay. It doesn't feel as though there was a novel for them to read all the various details of in order to potentially flesh out a screenplay or the staging of a scene when adapting that screenplay. There's just a script with based around a series of visceral events that need to be filmed, and they just go about kind of bluntly filming them. Gilbert Taylor giving it some gloss, but Richard Donner, not quite a cinematographic auteur by any means. Maybe one must have making it write an edgy article about that. Go for it. But nevertheless, it doesn't have the grace of if we can imagine how much more fluid or interesting this film could have been if directed by a William Friedkin or a John Carpenter, even a George A. Romero or a Peter Sykes, who directed To the Devil a Daughter for Hammer. Maybe I'm expecting too much of some of these other directors. Who knows if they could handle some of the immense set pieces featured in this film, although I'd be willing to give them a shot. Point is, I found The Omen to be just incredibly pulpy, entertaining fun, but it's also very viscerally frightening. I don't know, I do find the Jerry Goldsmith score is phenomenal. There's just something about it which I find it sucks. If I watch it late enough at night, it'll suck me in, and then I'm totally buying into this terrifying Satan, his minions on Earth, evil little Damien the Antichrist, and one Gregory Peck portraying Roger Thorne's attempt to save the world against all possibilities, pointing to the fact that the apocalypse is nigh. I like it when they manage to sneak in satanic mythology into a contemporary world, and it's just, otherwise unassuming and hidden beneath the surface. You never would have guessed it is there, but it's still all powerful. Creepy stuff. Good stuff. Have a good day, everyone. I hope everyone is well, wherever you are. Yes. Thanks again.